Cindy met and fell in love with Rick Thomas during her freshman year of college. He was funny, energetic, and made her laugh like no one else. He thought of funny ways to surprise her and always seemed to know the best way to show that he cared about her. Sometimes they would just take long walks on Sunday afternoons or sneak into one of the empty academic buildings on campus where they would just sit and talk for hours. He was handsome and kind, which was a rare combination in college. Her parents adored him, and at first sight his family was in love with her too. Rick's sister Kathy had once said half-jokingly, "If he ever breaks up with you, we'll definitely miss him." By the middle of his last semester, Rick had landed a job with a large investment firm on the West Coast. Cindy earned her teaching degree and began looking for a teaching job in Orange County, not far from Rick's job in Anaheim. She was hired by the local school district to teach 7th grade math. To celebrate the new job, Rick took her out to dinner at San Clemente overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Before dessert, he got down on one knee and asked for her hand in marriage. The ring, as befitted Rick, was gorgeous, just under 2 carats, in a gold setting that had belonged to his paternal grandmother. Cindy cried with joy, hugged Rick as hard as she could, and whispered in his ear, "Yes, yes, forever yes." And the people around them broke into applause. 9 years had passed. Cindy was 32 years old and the mother of twins, Michael and Sarah. They were 6 years old each. Cindy continued to teach but was tired of the low pay and long hours. Although she enjoyed some aspects of the job, being away from her family and putting up with idiot parents convinced her that enough was enough. Both she and Rick were good with finances, so Cindy was able to leave her teaching job even if it took her a year to get back on her feet. It only took 5 months, and it happened by coincidence. Cindy kept in touch with her best friend from college, Kelly. They met freshman year and hit it off right away. They ended up living in the same room for all 4 years. After college, they lived together during Cindy's 9-month engagement to Rick. If Cindy was fun and adventurous, Kelly was a hurricane. It's hard to say Kelly was a risk-taker because Kelly didn't seem to know the meaning of the word. Along with a free spirit, Kelly was devoid of any sense of planning or long-term thinking. She enjoyed the moment and rarely, if ever, thought, "Maybe I should stop and think about how this might turn out." Without any look before you leap, Kelly's DNA has led them to many adventures. Fortunately for Kelly, she had Cindy to steady her and keep an eye on her. More than once, Cindy steered Kelly away from potential disaster. At the time, Kelly would erupt in anger and later thank Cindy for being her favorite and needed friend. And on one such occasion, Cindy was on hand to pull Kelly out of the fire if necessary, and as it turned out, inadvertently set her career on a new course. It was late January when Kelly called Cindy and asked her to be her date for a wedding coming up in 3 weeks. Kelly's boss was getting married in Napa, and she was invited to the celebration. She couldn't wait to have fun and see what adventures might ensue, but she had matured emotionally and realized it would be best to have her significant other by her side. "This is going to be so much fun, Cindy," Kelly said, pleading with her buddy. "Lots of wine, dancing, and a bunch of cute young professionals." "Married to the twin sister," Cindy's nickname for Kelly. "So fun for who?" "Oh, don't be a prude," Kelly replied. "Spread your gorgeous blonde hair a little. A little fun away from Rick and the kids might spur you on a little." "Thanks, sis. How about we take him with us?" "Sorry, friend, but the invitation says guest not guests," Kelly replied, wondering why her friend couldn't be a little more relaxed now and then. Cindy ended their conversation, promising to check with Rick and call her back. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Cindy broached the subject with her husband. His answer didn't surprise her. "Better go and watch her, Cinderella." "I'm sure it'll be fun. Maybe you can stop by Froggy's Leap and get us a case of their 16 cabs." When she asked about the kids, Rick said, "I wanted to see Mom and Dad. It's been 4 months since our last visit, so I'm sure they won't miss the opportunity to spend a long weekend with the grandkids. Take care of your friend and enjoy the weekend without the twins, babe." She marveled that she had married such a good-natured and generous man. 3 weeks later, a somewhat frustrated Cindy was sitting at a table in one of Napa's nice wineries. She watched Kelly dancing with one of the groomsmen, who was probably about 8 years younger. Keeping her eyes on her exuberant friend, Cindy chatted with one of the bride's cousins. They exchanged opinions about weddings and noted that this one had started late and was generally disorganized. Sally, the cousin, remarked, "Someone could have pulled off a bang-up job if they were a great event coordinator." This got Cindy thinking, and at the same time thinking about how to wrestle Kelly away from her 22-year-old dance partner, who clearly wanted more than just salsa. It took about 6 months to organize, but finally Cindy embarked on a new career by starting her own event management business, We Plan, You Play. She was an organizer by nature. Her lesson plans and classroom delivery were always impeccable, so porting to weddings, reunions, business meetings, and any other events went smoothly. She researched several good companies, researched everything she needed to find the right niche, and embarked on her new hobby with tireless zeal. After 2 years in business, she began to thrive on small weddings, especially destination weddings on the beautiful California coast. It was then that she met Bennett Davis. Bennett owned and operated 3 upscale boutique hotels, each perfect for destination weddings. San Diego, Santa Barbara, and the Monterey Peninsula were all home to one of his hotels, and he did quite well. He worked hard, had a wonderful staff that he paid well and demanded excellence from. At 26, he used everything he had, and a little more, truth be told, to buy a dilapidated 90-year-old mansion in Santa Barbara. He had enough money and enough guts to open it on time and barely under budget. For the first 2 years, he worked 100-plus hours, 7 days a week. He nearly failed simply because word of mouth, even if it was complimentary, spread painfully slow. By the 3rd year, however, he reached break-even, and by the 4th year, he started making a profit. 3 years later, he opened a store in San Diego, and 2 more years later, he opened a gem in Monterey. 14 years later, he was still serious about his business, working long and hard, but he was also known for having a good time, especially if it included fine wines, dancing, and the opposite sex. Davis was, in the words of the women who knew him well, a CBNA, a confirmed bachelor, but not an asshole. He treated people fairly and honestly, even when he made it clear to potential women he wasn't looking for a long-term relationship. At 40, he was comfortable in his own skin and was very happy with the life he had built for himself. And so, about 16 months before the crisis moment, Cindy Davis Bennett was strolling through the Los Angeles Convention Center on South Figueroa with his manager, Lori Templeton, at a meeting of hospitality industry suppliers. At the end of the third aisle, having not yet spotted anything of interest, they stumbled upon Cindy Thomas and her We Plan, You Pay exhibit. Bennett would later tell Cindy privately that he was impressed with her presentation, but it was her bright blue eyes that caught his attention, hinting at a deeply mischievous personality. She later admitted, only to him, that she did a very, very subtle double take when she spotted him, because in her words he was gorgeous but didn't look like an asshole. They struck up a conversation that lasted 45 minutes. He was professional, but the connection was instantaneous. He asked tough questions. What was her track record? Who were the key people on her staff? How did she interact with company leadership? What was the worst event for her and why? The best and why? How did she determine her overhead and profit margin? He also managed to ask a few random but somewhat personal questions. What is your favorite wine? Do you know how to dance? The beach or the mountains? He noticed her wedding ring, but he just enjoyed a little friendly banter while he determined if he wanted to do business with this person. For her part, she answered his questions enthusiastically. She could tell he knew his business, but didn't seem to take himself too seriously. She also liked his more personal approach. Pinot Noir, Willamette Valley only, and preferably 2014. In particular, Evening Land La Source from Eola Amity Hills. I can waltz if I have to, but Carlton, Twist, and Tango are my favorites, but only with my husband. Mountains in the summer, any quiet beach in the summer. She smiled, but decided not to ask any questions about him. Lori Templeton took it all in with a wry chuckle. She knew when her boss was genuinely interested in someone. He was very polite and friendly to everyone he met, but he had a way of leaning in slightly when he really wanted to engage the person he was talking to. When they had finished talking and exchanged all the necessary information, Bennett said, Mrs. Templeton and I are going to have dinner at the Fogo de Chao in a couple of hours. Would you like to join us? Lori noticed that he used her formal name, which didn't happen to him very often, and assumed he wanted to make sure Cindy knew his intentions weren't inappropriate. Cindy brushed it off, noting that she was heading home after she put away her display to see Rick and the twins before bed. However, she also mentioned her desire to visit and wondered if that would be possible in the next couple weeks. By the time they were done, it was decided that she would visit his original Santa Barbara location his favorite of the three, the week after Wednesday for lunch and a tour. Lori and Cindy exchanged numbers. Cindy shook hands with both of them and ended their initial socializing. As they left, Lori kept looking at Bennett. He could feel her gaze. "What?" he asked as innocently as possible. "I suppose you saw the ring on her left hand." "Well, a guy can flirt now and then, can't he?" he replied, feigning offense. She didn't look at him, but replied knowingly, "Oh, is that what it was?" Cindy's on-site visit couldn't have gone any better. She had arranged to meet Bennett and Lori for lunch. It was only 120 miles from their home in Orange County to the meeting place, but Cindy had set aside 4 hours for the drive. She managed 3, so that left her with a little time to stop by the old Mission, which was less than a 15-minute drive from the hotel. Always careful with her time, she arrived at 11:45. The valet opened the door for her, smiled warmly, and said, "Welcome to the Winfield Scott Hotel, Mrs. Thomas." She was encouraged that her hosts might be as nice as they claimed. As she started up the short stairs to the hotel lobby, she looked up and saw Bennett Davis dressed in pressed khaki pants and a clean dark blue shirt from M.J. Bale. His loafers and belt were of fine Italian leather. The clothes further emphasized his masculine facial features. The dark blue color accentuated his dark hair and even darker brown eyes. Cindy rarely paid attention to men other than Rick. She wasn't a prude or naive. She just had a man she thought was gorgeous, so most others didn't compare. Bennett was in the same league in the looks department, maybe even a notch higher, and it took her by surprise. She also noticed that Lori wasn't beside him. "I'm really glad you could make it, Cindy. I can't wait to show you around the place and think about how the partnership could be beneficial to both of us," exclaimed Bennett, extending his hand in greeting. "Thank you, Bennett. At first glance, the place looks beautiful," Cindy replied, accepting his hand with a warm smile. Neither of them may not have realized it yet, but the connection they felt when they met in Los Angeles was genuine. They both respected hard work and success. Neither of them were pretentious or cared about people who were full of themselves. They both strived to be the best they were capable of. And neither of them was heavy on the looks. Cindy had chosen a light but relatively modest sleeveless black Tory Burch sundress with a pastel-dyed linen scarf that emphasized her bright blue eyes. The dress was slightly shorter than her knee, allowing her long legs to show off as much as possible. Her Stuart Weitzman sandals were comfortable yet stylish, with a heel high enough to bring her height closer to 5 feet 8 inches. Cindy was pragmatic. She knew that men like Bennett appreciated a woman's looks, which never hurt when running a business. However, she was, as some of her friends would say, innocent as a dove, but cunning as a fox. She took Bennett's outstretched hand and immediately began asking questions about the property as they glided through the hotel lobby. Every employee seemed to know her name, and when they sat down at the patio table to eat lunch, a small vase of California wildflowers stood in the center. The lavender, dark red, and bright white colors stood out very vividly against the white linen and Pacific blue background. Not surprisingly, there was also a bottle of the Pinot Noir wine that Cindy had mentioned during their first meeting. Pulling out a chair, Bennett thought, "This guy is really good, and I'm going to have to be on top of things so I don't get cheated." They chatted for a few minutes about the road, the recent wildfires, and the gorgeous ocean view. 10 minutes later, Lori appeared from around the corner, smiling and carrying a small folder for the business portion of the meeting. Cindy went up and gave her a hug. She liked Bennett a lot, but she also genuinely liked what she knew about Lori and was glad to see her. Over lunch, they chatted for another 45 minutes and then got down to business. Cindy limited herself to a glass and a half of wine to avoid distractions and also to let potential partners know that she was here for work, not play. After lunch, Lori excused herself, and for the next hour, Bennett gave her a top-to-bottom tour of Winfield Scott. Cindy was no novice and had done a great job. She knew the hotel was named after a famous shipwreck that occurred in 1583 off the coast of Santa Barbara. The ship had sunk with $1.5 million worth of gold bars, and she joked that perhaps Bennett's luck had something to do with the treasure hunt. He smiled, winked, and replied, "That's not the treasure I'm after." They laughed and continued the tour. A little later, Lori joined them, and they went to Bennett's office to discuss their options in detail. They came to several mutually beneficial arrangements for Cindy to host weddings and family reunions at Bennett Manor, and everyone was pleased with the possibilities. Late in the afternoon, when all business was completed, Bennett had Cindy's white VW Passat pulled up to the house. Lori said goodbye to him, and the two of them were alone for a moment longer. Bennett shook her hand firmly yet warmly, perhaps holding it a little longer than he should have, and said, "It was a pleasure to be with you today, and to get to know you better. I know we can make a great business together, but I'm also glad to get to know you better as a person." He then leaned over and kissed her politely on the cheek. Cindy smiled, thanked him for a wonderful day, and said she would contact Lori about a few weddings she thought would be perfect for the venue. As she pulled into the long driveway and left the grounds, she felt a strange sensation that took her by surprise. She realized she felt something for Bennett. She shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away, but the picture of Bennett standing at the top of the steps when she'd arrived, the small details he'd made perfect, wouldn't leave her alone. She was still daydreaming when she glanced in the rearview mirror before changing lanes. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a book in the back seat. It was one of Sarah's favorite books that she must have left in the car. The book, The Most Magnificent Thing, was lying face up, and that quickly brought Cindy back to the real world. "Oh, girl," she thought, "you're spending too much time with Kelly. You're not a 16-year-old sophomore, you're a happily married woman. Get your head out of your ass." She was genuinely unhappy with herself. She was married to a wonderful man, had 2 beautiful children. There was no room in her life for acting like a frivolous teenager, much less flirting with someone not named Rick Thomas. After spending 20 minutes self-defeating, she turned on a podcast discussing women in business and began to disconnect. If she was honest with herself, however, she would have recognized that she was getting too close to a dangerous line. Back at the hotel, Bennett went to his office and quickly settled a few business matters. Then he retired to his room to rest before his evening run on the beach. He stretched out on the bed. He began to think about the day gone by and, most importantly, about her. She was beautiful on the outside as well as the inside. Bennett had dated several beautiful women in his life, some of them even stunning, but none of them were like Cindy. Her eyes, her personality, the way she walked, and mostly the look when she left him all ran through his mind. She was married, damn it, but she was amazing. At the same moment, Rick was at home with Michael and Sarah cooking dinner. He was thinking about Cindy too, moving around the kitchen, cooking and laughing with the kids. In that moment, he realized how truly blessed he was. When Cindy arrived, the table was already set, and they enjoyed an hour of eating while listening to Sarah tell how she had found the neighbor's cat, Ralph, in their yard and played with him for a while until Mrs. Bowling came and took him home. She wondered if they should get a pet. Later, when the children had gone to bed, Cindy, perhaps wanting to assure herself that she was the only woman, made love to Rick. The 6 months and 4 We Plan, You Play weddings organized at Winfield Scott came to pass, but not without warning. Perhaps it started with a casual touch on the arm, or Bennett putting his hand on her back as he opened the door in front of her. Or maybe it was the time spent together, as Bennett made it a habit to stop by her place every time Cindy had company. Whatever the case, Cindy never shied away from his gestures, compliments, or even light flirting. Rick had only once traveled with her to check out the venue, but that had been early, and Bennett had been away on other business that day. Or so they'd been told. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Cindy and Lori had just said goodbye to the very happy mother and father of the bride after another successful wedding. The cleaning crew was already finishing up their work when Cindy and Lori sat down on the patio, alone enjoying a glass of Dom Perignon left over from the reception. Sure, technically they could have accidentally sneaked it from the bar into Lori's bag, which had carelessly ended up at the very back of the hotel's giant refrigerator under a box of salad, but mistakes like this happen. "I know it's late," Lori said, taking off both shoes that were killing her feet, "but can we talk for a minute?" "Sure," Cindy replied, copying her friend's idea and rubbing her toes. "Anything in particular?" "You know I really enjoy working with you and consider you my friend, right?" said Lori with some concern in her voice. Cindy nodded in agreement, wondering where this was going. "And I don't consider myself entitled to meddle in other people's affairs uninvited, but I need to tell you something, or I'll feel like I've let you down." "Do you mind?" Cindy didn't answer anything but nodded her head in agreement. "You know he'll do it to you if you let him," Lori said in a quiet tone. Cindy raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything back, so she continued. "I love you both to bits, but I realized the first day we met in LA that you're the kind of woman that Bennett is attracted to. To put it bluntly, you're just gorgeous inside and out. You are a hot woman with an amazing head on your shoulders, and that drives him crazy. The only reason he hasn't pushed too hard is because he respects you and your marriage. I'm not going to say that he would never destroy your marriage because that's just not true. He may not think that a bed relationship with you would be harmful if kept secret, but deep down, he knows the tragic consequences it could lead to. One of the things that makes him so great in business is his ability to think 5 steps ahead when other guys are still on step 2. So he's laid back, no pressure, but if he decides that's what you want, he won't hesitate to get you into bed. Cindy listened intently, though she found it difficult to maintain eye contact with Lori, whose gaze wasn't accusatory or judgmental, but it wasn't gentle either. Cindy, I don't see any way you can do this with Bennett and keep your life. He's not going to take you away from Rick and marry you. You won't divorce your husband, leave the twins, and sail off into the sunset. Bennett is not a bore. He will not leave you. He will most likely remain your friend for life. He is in love with you and incredibly loyal. It's not just about business, although he is very impressed with that side of you. He likes the kind of person you are, but not enough to settle down. You have to ask yourself if you want a family as it is now, or an idiot for the rest of your life, with about a 95% chance of him ruining your marriage. Tears came to Cindy's eyes as she replied, "Oh, Lori, I'm so confused. I don't know what to do. Rick is an amazing man. Even after 10 years of our marriage, we laugh easily, have serious, long conversations, and rock in bed. He supports me and challenges me in all the right ways. I can't imagine my life without him, and the thought of hurting him makes me almost nauseous. But Bennett," her voice trailed off for a moment, as she struggled to find the words. "He's intoxicating in a way that Rick can't be. I feel he's dangerous, but in a good way somehow." She paused briefly and took a couple sips of champagne. Lori gave her time to catch her breath without interfering. She wanted her new friend to wrestle with reality without saving her. Whatever decision Cindy made should be hers alone. Lori had gotten up the courage to tell her the truth, but now it was time to shut up and listen. "I've never felt repressed by anyone in my life. I fell desperately in love with Rick very quickly, but I wouldn't say I was so in love that I felt out of control. What I feel with Bennett is out of control. When he looks at me a certain way, I just melt inside. I don't know why, but I know that if the right moment came and he brought me into his bed, I would willingly give myself to him." She continued, "6 months ago, I would have taken offense if anyone would have suggested that someone might be more desirable than my husband, or that I might be having an affair. I'm not a progressive. I think all this reasoning that women should be free to walk around outside of marriage and expect their husbands to be faithful is just nonsense. Marriage is a commitment both ways. I tried to imagine Rick coming home and telling me he was with another woman, and it kills me to even think about it. So why am I being so hypocritical and playing with fire?" "What are you going to do?" asked Lori fondly, saddened by her friend's pain. 80% I'm going to stay true to my husband and children," Cindy began. "I won't quit working with you because this is too good a business deal to pass up. That 80% say I can do it and not give in to the desire between my ears. But the other 20% says I can do it covertly and discreetly. It says I can let it go, get it out of my system, and then go back to the way I know it should be. Honestly, I'm not so sure. Most days I want 80% to win. But there are times..." At this point, she dropped her head in her hands and began to sob. Lori stood up and walked over to Cindy's side of the table. Putting her arms around her friend, she held her for a few moments without saying a word. Finally, she said, "Well, you know the truth, you know the risks, and I really hope you make the right decision in the future." The next day, Lori walked into Bennett's office uninvited and with a somber expression on her face. She met her eyes with her boss and held his gaze for a moment before she spoke. "If you do this, I'll quit and never work for you again. And don't think you can hide that from me, boss. I've worked beside you almost every day for the last 7 years. I'll know, even if you hide it. I'll know." She turned without waiting for an answer and almost, but not quite, slammed the door behind her, leaving. In the end, it was the perfect storm. 3 weeks after Lori had talked to Cindy and confronted Bennett, a rare event occurred. A heavy rainstorm that came out of nowhere hit an outdoor wedding that was almost completely ruined. Everyone rushed to help move indoors. Cindy and Lori shouting instructions to the staff as they tried to get the bride and groom into the hotel lobby. 4 hours later, well past midnight, everything that could be salvaged was done. The reception went as well as it could, and everyone dispersed to their rooms. Cindy and Bennett stood at the very end of the patio, in the shade, away from prying eyes. Bennett put his hand on Cindy's shoulder. He knew she was upset, even though she couldn't control the weather. She had always strived for perfection, and that was one of the things that drew him to her. Half hugging her and looking out at the Pacific Ocean, he said, "You've done your best, partner. You can't dictate to Mother Nature, and everyone had a good time despite the downpour. Hell, in a couple years they'll be talking about this at the Thanksgiving table and laughing for years to come." Cindy didn't pull away but let her head lean against his chest. It felt so good to be so close, to feel safe. Cindy's 80% was starting to lose the battle. She took a deep breath as if surrendering, said nothing, turned to hug him fully, and looked into Bennett's eyes. Before leaning in to kiss her, he said, "Think about it carefully. I'm not going to force myself on you. You should want this as much as I do. If not, let's remain friends and business partners. We can always wonder what if, but if it's not 100% both ways, we have to stop right now." In the next instant, the 80% dissolved, the line was crossed, and they both made a move that in a few months would be regretted for the rest of their lives. "Take me to bed," Cindy sighed. They made their way to the bedroom and got down to it. Then they started talking. How would they keep this a secret? What precautions would they take to keep their date out of the spotlight? He worried that she would be overcome with guilt, and it would be over. She assured him that she could handle her emotions and wanted to be with him as much as possible without arousing suspicion. She left after saying good night and good morning and said she would head home after getting 4 hours of sleep. She wanted to rest before going back to her family. She actually wanted to sleep until noon, but she knew that would raise suspicion. He promised to walk her out when she left. Cindy crept silently into her room, set her alarm clock, fell onto her bed, and was instantly asleep. Bennett took the sheets off the bed, washed them himself, remade the bed, and fell asleep until the morning crew arrived at exactly 6:30 a.m. What could have gone wrong? When she got home, it was the middle of Sunday afternoon. Sarah and Michael heard her pull up and barely had time to get out of the car before they surrounded her, hugging her. They were almost 8 years old each and getting big. She hadn't been in since lunch on Friday, but they swamped her with happy news about the weekend. "Daddy took us to the big kiddie park yesterday and we rode down the giant slide. Ralph is back and misses. Bowling brought us cookies when she came to get him. Daddy made us Mickey Mouse pancakes for breakfast and said, maybe next week we can go to Disneyland and ride the rides. Mommy, did Daddy ever take you on rides with him?" The last question made her wince slightly. At the mention of Daddy and rides, the crude conversations she had exchanged with her lover just 12 hours ago flashed through her mind. And yes, she thought, as she packed her overnight bag, last night's rides had caused her to stagger a bit today. She mentally wrinkled her nose when she saw Rick standing in the doorway, wiping his hands with a dish towel. He was wearing Adidas shorts and one of his cycling t-shirts. Damn, she thought. He looks so good. What the hell am I doing? As she set the bag down and they hugged, she said, "Hi, baby. It's been a rough wedding. I'm so glad to be home and in your arms. I hope the twins weren't too crazy. We always miss you, Cinderella, but I love spending time with the kids on the weekends, and I'm so glad you are thriving in your business. I was watching the radar when the news was talking about the storm and figured you had plenty of business. Let me get you a glass of wine and rub your feet." Son of a bitch, she pondered. His favorite name for me, loving children so well, sacrificing himself so I can pursue my passion. Hell, wrong word, girl, get it together. Now wine and foot massages. I can't lose him or this family. Later, when the kids had already gone to bed, they decided to move the wine and conversation to the hot tub. Fortunately for Cindy, Rick admitted that he was exhausted beyond belief and asked for a reprieve. She feigned slight disappointment, but immediately admitted that she was exhausted too. She wouldn't explain the real reason, and he didn't ask because he assumed that his wife would only be faithful. On Monday, Rick asked her if she wanted to go out Tuesday night. She enthusiastically said yes. Early Tuesday morning, while Cindy was still asleep, he got up and secretly packed for both of them. Before leaving for work, he left her a note. "Dress for your Cinderella date and be ready for 4 p.m. Don't worry about the kids. Everything is ready. At exactly 4, they hugged the kids and thanked Kelly, who was in town and asked to babysit. Then they jumped in the car and drove off. Rick drove her to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel overlooking Dana Point. When they pulled into the parking lot, Cindy was stunned. Is Kelly staying the night? Yes. I didn't bring a change of clothes. I hope you don't need too many clothes, but you have a bag in the trunk. While you were bathing the kids, Kelly double-checked it. She probably traded in what you'll wear to bed this evening. You let her get into my underwear drawer? Yes. She said it was a little out of place for a boring housewife, but she found something she thought would work. She also said not to worry, she'll take you lingerie shopping this week. Bastard! They took a long walk on the beach, ate an amazing dinner. Around midnight, they sat on the 6th-floor balcony, looking out at the unusually docile Pacific Ocean, and talked about their lives, dreams, and futures. Rick shared the news that he was in line for partnership, which meant more money and less traveling. He even talked about the possibility of occasionally accompanying her on wedding weekends. It was dark, and they were both facing the ocean, so he couldn't see her face. If he had seen it, it might have been the first sign that something was wrong. Cindy quickly came to her senses, stood up, walked over, and said, "I'm so proud of you, Richard Michael Thomas." During a leisurely breakfast in bed, they continued their conversation from where they had left off a few hours earlier. "Kid, I'm so proud of your upcoming promotion, and I'd love for you to travel with me from time to time, but I hope you don't think I should quit my business because we can afford it." "Never," Rick replied. "I know how much you love it, and your career is as important to me as my own. You're amazing at what you do, and I want you to take this business as far as you want to go." How the hell did I find such an amazing guy? She wondered to herself. I can't screw this up. Bennett and I need to review our plans to make sure they're airtight. Her complete lack of logic and love didn't get out of her head. There wasn't an ounce of guilt in her, only a desire to fulfill that dream. In later years, she wondered to herself how she could have been such a selfish idiot. Men were often accused of thinking outside their own heads, but in truth, Cindy was doing just that. Her libido was on the rise when she turned 30, and she had somehow convinced herself that she could have it all and no one would get hurt. She was sure that at some point in a few years she and Bennett would break up. She knew they had a deep emotional connection, but Bennett would never fall completely in love, and she would never abandon her family. He would find another woman to float along, and she would enjoy a long life with her loving husband. High school years, college, marriage, and grandchildren all seemed to be part of the plan for her. Never, even in her wildest dreams, could she have envisioned the impending tragedy. The next month, Rick was promoted to partner. She had another wedding, this time at a San Diego hotel, and she had a long discussion with her lover about how to secure what they were doing. Cindy had been on birth control pills for 2 years. When she started her business, she and Rick decided that they had 2 wonderful children, and that was enough for both of them. It was late June when things started to fall apart. Bennett and Cindy were in his office in WS discussing new terms for their agreement. Initially, Bennett had offered some bonuses if Cindy brought in more orders than expected. They may have been lovers, and their dating had continued to this day, but as they always said in the mob, it's business, not personal. And Cindy reminded Bennett of their agreement. He lamented that he had underestimated her business acumen, but agreed to what was owed to her. At that moment, Lori appeared in the doorway. "I'm glad I caught you two together. I need to talk to you both," Lori said, without waiting for an invitation to join the conversation. She lowered herself into one of the leather chairs and continued. "Bennett, remember our conversation 4 months ago? I told you that if you two were going out, I'd leave." Cindy's face reflected first shock and then horror. Bennett was a better poker player and remained calm. "That you ignored that warning or just chose sex over me was surprising, but I guess inevitable. The night of the hurricane, I was on the 2nd-floor patio sipping a glass of wine when you two kissed, and you, looking at Bennett, picked up Cindy, looking at her, and carried her to your bed. It was one of the saddest moments of my adult life. Not just for me, but for what I deeply believe could have happened to both of you. I'm not judging, but I can't be a part of it." Cindy started to object, but Lori held up her hand, showing she wasn't done yet. "Actually, I guess I am judging, I guess. I think what you're doing is short-sighted and childishly selfish. You're acting like teenagers, thinking only of your own gratification, and not of the larger consequences. The following Monday, I began my search for a new job. The only reason it took so long is that I had to analyze several good offers. I'm moving to Austin, Texas in early August, and will be working for an event management company there. She then shifted her gaze to Cindy. Please remember that I warned you, Cindy. The shit may not have hit the fan yet, but don't think the piper won't come and claim his share. I'm disappointed in you even though I've known you for less than a year. You seem to lack common sense, not to mention fidelity to the vows you made before God, family and friends when you married Rick. He doesn't deserve what you're doing to him. I'm going to leave your children out of this because, frankly, when I think of the damage this will do to them, it makes me want to cry. Lori concluded by addressing them both. I'm going to be professional. I won't let this affect the good years we've had, and I intend to honor my commitment. Bennett visibly flinched at those words. But please only talk to me about work, not what you two do. Don't make excuses or make a scene. The staff here is wonderful, and I know they don't deserve to be dragged into all this. I will tell them that I just couldn't refuse this offer, and I'm sure you will find a great replacement. As far as I'm concerned, Sharon would have been a good choice, but it's your choice. Thank you for 7 wonderful years, and I wish you both success. With those words, she rose and left the room. Tears streamed down Cindy's face, and Bennett hung his head, muttering, "Screw me!" For several minutes they sat in complete silence as a light breeze blew through the open French doors. They had planned to spend the evening together and all that entailed, but that was clearly not going to happen. Neither of them knew what to say. Finally, Cindy rubbed her eyes. Bennett, I'm going to head home. Now is not the time to try to figure things out. I know we're both to blame, but for my part, I'm very sorry for causing all of this. I'll call you in a few days. She got up, walked out of his office, and left the hotel. She asked the valet to take her car as she needed to get home unexpectedly. She drove back to Orange County, cried the whole way, and checked into the Courtyard Marriott Hotel using her business American Express because Rick never looked at her. On the way, she stopped in time to buy a bottle of Maker's Mark. She checked into her room and fell asleep. The first shoe dropped. Lori made good on her promise and moved to Austin about 10 days after working her last 2 weeks for Bennett. He didn't try to talk her out of it or offer her more money. He knew that would only insult her. Once or twice he had tried to broach the subject, but Lori wouldn't enter the conversation. You can't say anything to Bennett, was her reply. Cindy wanted to call, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she texted Lori, I'm sorry my actions hurt you. You warned me, but I can't let it go unaddressed. In early September, the relationship between Bennett and Cindy was a little different than usual. Perhaps they were both struggling with guilt, or maybe they were just hurt that Lori had caught them at it. Their attraction to each other never waned, however, and by early October they were back to their old form. One Saturday night after a late wedding, they had an unusually long evening to enjoy each other. They left WS and took Bennett's BMW M8 convertible to the coast to a secluded VRBO chalet overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Oh my God, this is gorgeous, Cindy murmured as she cuddled her stallion. Cindy had told Rick before she left that she was scouting the Monterey area and wouldn't be home until late Sunday evening at the earliest. It was true, she just hadn't told him that she would be traveling with her lover. Bennett checked out of the hotel late, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so Sunday morning they took a walk on the beach and had lunch before it was time to hit the road back. On the way, they stopped in Big Sur for a glass of wine each. For the remaining 5+ hours of their drive south, Cindy felt so content and full of life that she marveled at her good fortune. Her business was thriving, her children were doing well, she had 2 wonderful men in her life, and she was sure that Lori's fears had been in vain. It had been 15 months since she had met Bennett, 8 months since the beginning of their illicit affair, Cindy wouldn't call it that, and everything seemed to be just fine. Her utter selfishness in betraying and lying to Rick on a regular basis kept her on her toes. In fact, she was so detached from reality that she thought her once-a-month flings with Bennett were good for her as a wife. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. On the first weekend in December, Cindy coordinated a wedding at Bennett's Monterey Hotel, just east of Barrack Park. The Spanish Moss Hotel was a bit smaller than Bennett's other venues, but it was perfect for weddings of 50 people or less. The wedding at the Carlisle had 38 people, which meant 2 things. It was very easy for Cindy to manage the event, and not all of the hotel rooms were booked. If Bennett had looked at the reservation list, he would have noticed that Mr. Thomas had booked the belladonna room with an ocean view, a large jetted tub, and a king-size bed with 4 posters. Mrs. Thomas was not listed. Mr. Thomas, a new partner in his investment firm, was going to surprise his wife and join her for the weekend. He had taken care of all the details, including fresh flowers, Cindy's favorite wine chilled to perfection, and the best bubble bath oils. Rick didn't think he and his wife had drifted apart, but he felt they had lost some of their connection and intimacy. In his naivete, he had written it off to long hours of work and raising children. It was up to him to find out how wrong he was. Since none of the local staff had ever met Rick, he had no trouble waiting incognito until the rehearsal dinner was over and Cindy had finished her work. He had spotted Bennett twice earlier in the evening, but he was out of his sight and easily concealed. He considered calling Bennett and letting him know his plan, but he didn't know him that well and didn't want to risk him accidentally blabbing. An hour after dinner was over, with Cindy still out in the hall, Rick decided to find her and surprise her. However, he didn't find her in the dining room or on the patio outside the establishment. But he heard voices around the corner, and one of them unmistakably belonged to his wife. Perhaps she was discussing with one of the staff some details of tomorrow's marriage ceremony. Moments before he rounded the corner, he heard his wife say in a sultry voice, "Not here. Please wait until we get back to your room." A second later, Rick rounded the corner, not believing what he heard, and was confronted with the most horrific sight of his life. His beloved wife and Bennett. They didn't see him at first, as it was quite dark, and Cindy spoke. "Lover, I love you so much." Cindy opened her eyes for a split second and screamed, "Rick, what? But—" Bennett turned his head and immediately released Cindy. He stepped back as if he saw the ghost of Christmas future in his own tombstone. His dark, complex face went pale. Rick, for his part, took it all for granted and instantly realized that his life was over. He leaned against the wall, tears coming to his eyes. He felt himself continue to fall to his knees as he began to realize what was happening. Cindy walked over to him as he was on his knees shaking. "Rick, baby, please! Oh, Rick! Oh no! What have I done?" Stunned, Rick couldn't react quickly, and Cindy hugged him for a moment as they both began to sob. Bennett, for his part, took a few steps back, putting his hands behind his head as if he had just run a long sprint and was trying to catch his breath. There was a look of horror in his eyes. After a moment, Rick looked up at Cindy, who held his face in her hands. He uttered the only word that came to his mind. "Why?" Cindy started to answer, but as Rick slowly regained his emotional equilibrium, anger began to brew within him. "No, Cindy," he said, standing up abruptly and stepping back. She was on her knees looking up at him with pleading eyes, but she couldn't get a word out. She couldn't say anything that mattered at that moment. "No, Cindy, don't talk to me. Don't say one damn word." He looked at Bennett with hatred in his eyes. "Take her to your room, you bastard." "She's all yours." As he turned to leave, Cindy stood up and tried to reach behind him. He pounced on her. "Don't you dare touch me, bitch. You're the mother of my children. You were the love of my life. You were everything, and now you've ruined us. You've ruined me. Just go away with your stud and leave me alone." Cindy couldn't beat the only common sense she had shown in the last year. She let Rick go. She knew this was not the time or place to try to comfort him, explain, lie to him, or anything else. She had ripped his heart out. She could see it in his eyes. She needed to leave him alone. For now. She was in a state of shock herself and wouldn't be able to utter a single meaningful word anyway. She turned to Bennett and asked him to leave her alone. Then she went back to her room, to her perfectly made bed with spotless white sheets, pillows, and blankets. She threw herself on the bed. Cindy Thompson desperately tried to control her heartbeat and breathing. The 34-year-old wife and mother of twins was in a crisis situation that she herself had created, and was horrified that there was no way out of it. Rick, for his part, began to gather his thoughts and emerge from the emotional fog that was choking his ability to think. He went back to his room and sat at his desk for an hour without moving. At some point, he managed to come to his senses and began to think about what to do. He knew he wouldn't stay here a millisecond longer than necessary. But what should he do? Where to go? He decided that the best thing to do would be to go home. He wouldn't get there until 7 in the morning anyway, and he could walk into the office, which would be empty on Sunday. He could shower, shave, and put on clean clothes. By then, he would have an excuse for Mrs. bowling about his early return. He could pretend if there was no one but his children. Before he left, he wrote Cindy a note and left it in an envelope on the table with her name on it. Cindy, I'm going home to my kids. I don't know what else to do right now, and I need time to think. To say you broke my heart and soul is like saying the Titanic gave a little leak. I'm drowning in despair, and I don't know which way to turn. When you get home, or if you do, please email me ahead of time. I plan to leave as soon as you get here. I won't talk to you or even look at you until I have time to weigh in on what has happened. I will tell the kids that I will have to go out of town this week for work, but Mom will be home with them. I hate the thought of leaving these precious lives with you, but now I have no other choice. Do not attempt to call, text, or contact me in any way after you let me know you are minutes away. I know I can't trust you to honor my request, but I hope you have a shred of human dignity left in your callous heart to take that first step toward our end. You actually took the first steps when you started having fun with your boyfriend, however long ago that was. I loved you with all my heart, mind, and soul, and you pissed all over it and left me. At this moment, I hate you with pure hatred. How the hell could you? Rick. When Bennett came out of his room an hour or so later, he found Rick gone. He also discovered the note and took it to Cindy the next morning. He was going to take it directly to her, but he didn't have the heart to tell her the horrible news, which should have been even more horrible. He cursed and blamed himself for taking their date so lightly. He had always been on guard. He should have been on guard to prevent a possible disaster, but he hadn't. And now the person he cared for so much was broken, and he was powerless to help him heal. Later, when her sobs had subsided and it was clear that she had calmed down a bit, he snuck into her room and put the note on her bedside table. Then he went and stood guard at her door. Why, he didn't know, but he felt he had to do something. Cindy woke up around 6 in the morning after 3 hours of being awake and tossing and turning. She hadn't intended to sleep at all, but the emotional turmoil had exhausted her. She got up, washed her face, and peed. As she came out of the bathroom, she started crying again, and then she saw the note. Cindy was proud of herself for being strong for herself, her family, and friends. But when she looked at the envelope, she was completely confused. She already knew things were going to be bad, even horrible, and she also knew she deserved the message Rick had delivered. Quietly, with eyes full of tears, she sat down on the bed, opened the envelope, and read it. Then she collapsed to the floor again, sobbing uncontrollably. Bennett came into the room, knelt down beside her, and put his arms around her. She clung to him. In the back of her mind, she wanted to blame him, to lash out at him for seducing her, but she knew their relationship was a two-way street. She remembered the first time he had demanded that she agree that she was consenting, or he would end it all at once. She also remembered Laurie's warnings. No, Cindy realized that she was many things, including a very bad person, but not a victim. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with it. I'm going home as soon as I can pull myself together, Bennett. I don't know what's going to happen, but I have to face it. I know, Cindy, I wish things were different, but I know you well enough to know that you won't run away, hide, or shift blame for your decisions. You're an amazing woman and friend. If I could take that away from you, I would, but I know I can't. Just know I'm always here for you. Thank you, Bennett. I sincerely hope none of this hurts you, but who knows? I'll call you and let you know how things go, but I think we should both prepare ourselves for the fact that we may never speak to each other again. He hugged her tightly, like a friend, not a lover, and simply said, I know. Then stood up and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. He told the staff to bring her car around, but to leave her alone. She had a complicated family situation and was a little upset this morning. The new staff shook their heads and went about their business. The veterans were no fools. They knew who Mr. Thomas was and what had happened. For the rest of the day, a heavy veil hung over the entire area. When Cindy was 15 minutes away from home, she texted Rick. Any chance you can come back when the kids are asleep and we can talk? It's all my fault, but I hope we can find a way out. Cinderella. Rick replied, I'm ready to go. The kids have already eaten dinner. This is our last contact until I contact you, Cindy. Please honor my request. She wept again, realizing that the name Cinderella would probably never come out of his mouth again. She was no longer his loving wife and best friend. She was his whore wife who had disrespected him in the most horrible way, in the arms of another man. What would become of them all? At the end of the longest week of her life for Cindy, Rick called her. She answered on the first ring. Hi, Rick, I'm glad you called, she said with hope in her voice. His voice was steady. Cindy, I'll be home around 5 tonight. I haven't gotten off work all week somehow. He started to choke, but before he could catch himself, there was a heavy pause. She waited. I'll make a poker face and try to be myself around the kids. I pray I have the strength to do that for 3 hours. Then I'll go to bed in the spare room and I won't talk to you until tomorrow morning when the kids get up. I'll try to get up early so they won't notice our sleeping arrangement. Is that okay with you? Yes, Rick, Cindy said quietly, as you see fit. When do you think we can talk? She didn't want to push too hard, but even though she knew it was all her fault, everything inside her was dying to know what was going on in his head. I've arranged for Mrs. Bowling to babysit on Sunday afternoon. We can find a secluded corner in the park to sit and talk. I think it will be best if we stay with the children together all day Saturday, as we are not sure how many more days we will have with them, if at all. His words, if at all, caught her off guard like a sudden punch to the stomach. The pain in his voice made her want to throw up. She'd never heard anything like that from him before. He'd always been strong, even when it was hard. But never before had it been this hard. Betrayal was a cruel master. Okay, honey, was all she said. Cindy, Rick replied in a tone so even and devoid of emotion that it shook her to the core. Please don't ever address me with affectionate words again. I'm not cute, I'm not a baby, and you're certainly not my Cinderella. We are two adults caught in a horrible nightmare, and we won't be able to wake up anytime soon, if ever. Don't use words claiming love or affection for me ever again. Please. He hung up without waiting for a reply. Cindy sank into a chair, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Somehow they made it through Friday's pizza and the movie, even laughing a little at Michael's description of why he thought the family should buy a dog. Saturday went the same way. They pretended everything was fine. Once or twice they thought Sarah sensed something amiss, but they redoubled their efforts and tried their best to be a loving couple in front of their children. The worst moment was when Michael called for a group hug as they walked down the beach. The dead look Cindy saw in Rick's eyes almost broke her, even though he hugged her tightly, lying about his true emotions. Sunday morning passed over pancakes and wallowing in their pajamas. Rick announced to the kids that Mom and Dad were going out together, and Mrs. Bowling would watch them after lunch. Sarah and Michael were not thrilled with the idea. They wanted to spend more time together with their family, but Dad was adamant, and they ran off to their rooms to change for the rest of the day. Once they arrived at the park, they walked around for a while until they found a quiet spot away from the road where there was a small picnic table. Rick sat down facing the park, across from Cindy. Like him, she thought. He always wants to be able to see the crowd around him, so he knows if he's in any danger of getting into trouble. I'd like you to speak first, if you don't mind, Rick began. I'm afraid if I speak first, I won't be able to control my words. I promise I won't interrupt you, and I want you to say whatever you want to say. It's up to you whether it takes 5 minutes or 50. It's important to me that you have time to speak. If that's okay with you, please feel free to start any time. Cindy thought for a moment. This felt like a negotiation, and in an environment like this, she never wanted to speak first. However, everything had happened through her fault, so it was only right to let Rick handle the conversation as he saw fit. Of course, Cindy replied, trying to be supportive of his wishes. I don't know where to begin, Rick. I've been thinking about what I should say since last Friday when... She omitted the words. She couldn't bring herself to remember that moment and the horror, pain, and utter despair she'd seen in his eyes. You deserve the truth, and I will try to give it to you. I've been in a physical relationship with Bennett for the better part of 8 months. He dropped his head on his hands, but then raised his eyes as if to say, Go on. Before I met him, I had never been attracted to men or had an inappropriate relationship with anyone. I didn't seek him out or pursue him because there was something missing in our relationship. While I didn't pursue him, I can't say I resisted his friendship and flirting. I realized early on that while the business side of it may be awesome, for the first time in my life I was attracted to someone other than my husband. I'm not defending him or trying to make you feel worse than you are, but the first time we were together, he stopped me before our first kiss and made me decide if we were going to move on or not. He said he didn't want to push me and would only continue if I wanted it as much as he did. I continued. No one forced or coerced me. No one forced me to do anything I didn't want to do. I can't yet say why I was attracted to it or what I did, but I'm not going to play the victim. Anything that happens between us will fall on my shoulders. Bub! She quickly corrected herself. I'm sorry, Rick. I want to tell you that I love you with all my heart, that this means nothing to me, and beg you to forgive me and give us a chance to heal. But now I realize that I've been hiding a part of my heart from you for the past few months. You didn't notice any difference, at least I don't think you did. But when I was with you, a tiny part of me was somewhere else, with Bennett. If it wasn't, I never would have done what I did. I lied to you and I lied to myself. I told myself that I really did love you completely, that this would pass and everything would be okay. You would be in blissful ignorance. We would raise kids and grow old together. I think deception starts with yourself before you can deceive others. So I betrayed everything I cared about. I have no idea how this will turn out or how it will affect our children, but I know that nothing good will come of it, even if our relationship can be salvaged. Finally, at least in this first conversation, I want to say how horrible I feel about what I did. Regret is not what describes my emotions. I'm not sorry that I got caught. I am devastated by what I did to the only person who has ever loved me unconditionally for what I am. Whatever happens to us, I'll need to dive into it with professional help. I've screwed up more than I could have ever imagined. I always thought I was a pretty good person. I discovered, perhaps too late, that I am not. I have deep flaws that are ugly. They are mine and no one else's. I am responsible for them. I'm deeply ashamed and I want you to know it. Rick bowed his head and cried. It was a good thing they were in the distance, because emotions overwhelmed him. Joy, fulfillment, friendship, love, and mutual respect had been stripped out of his life and replaced with despair, grief, loss, humiliation, and emptiness. He wanted to respond in anger, to yell at her and berate her, but he couldn't do it. She probably would have welcomed the tirade instead of the quiet sobs that burst from his lips. Once again, it hit her like a ton of bricks, how much she had taken from him. After 10 minutes, which seemed like 10 hours to her, he finally pulled himself together and spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it wasn't weak. There was a confidence in it. Cindy, I don't know if this is the last time we're talking alone together as husband and wife or not. I'm still trying to sort out my feelings. I appreciate that you didn't disrespect me even more by saying you love me, and it was all a mistake, just sex, nothing more, etc. I thank you for being honest about what happened. At least I assume you're honest, but I guess in the end I'll never know. It was Cindy's turn to drop her head on her hands in despair. What he said was true, but it hurt like hell. She fought the urge to look up at him as he continued. You've been entertaining Bennett for 8 months now behind my back, once a month or more. You're right. I've been completely in the dark about your actions because I trusted you with everything. My love, my heart, my very life. I know I can never trust you again. Cinderella is dead, and there is no Prince Charming to come to the rescue. I've never been hopeless in my life, and I hate the feeling, but I think it's the only honest, untainted emotion I recognize in my heart. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to divorce you now or anytime soon. A psychologist once said in a lecture, if you are married and have children and are thinking about divorce, go outside and throw yourself under the bus. Children deal with loss much better than the choice of abandonment that comes with divorce. This has always seemed true to me, but I never thought I would be in a situation where it would apply to me. However, the alternative of playing house for the next 11 years until the twins graduate high school and go off to college is unacceptable to me. I can't bear the thought. I can't bring myself to look at you, much less pretend that we're still the same. So, about 48 hours after this disaster began, I am stuck. I am hopeless and desperate. I can't see any way forward. I'm going to talk to a psychologist this week and see what she has to offer. Cindy looked at him hopefully. As if reading her thoughts, Rick quickly added, I'm not doing this for you or our marriage, but for my sanity and in the hope that I can find a path that will allow me to retain a modicum of dignity and love my children. Rick paused and Cindy asked, Where are you and I staying? Should we get a hotel or a small apartment? I want us to stay in the house for now, Rick replied. I think if I have an overnight business trip once a week to give me a break, and you go away for at least 2 work weekends next month like you usually do, I can live with that. What you do, where you go, and who you spend time with when you're gone is up to you. I'm not going to let myself take care of you right now, so if you feel better in Bennett's arms, knock yourself out. Rick, I'm not going to, Cindy began to protest. Rick made the speak to the hand sign. Please stop, Cindy. You're acting like you're talking to someone who cares about what you do, who you have or don't have fun with, how you are or aren't promiscuous. The only way I'm breathing right now is to care about you, just like you've cared about me for the past 8 months. You didn't care about me or my life, and now I'm making the same choice with you. Maybe a psychologist can help me find a better way to protect myself, but until then, you're on your own. For the next half hour, they both sat there crying and talking about nothing. No hands across the table, no soothing words of, we'll find a way to deal with this. Crossed arms, heads down, tears. Laurie's prophetic warning had come true. The paymaster came when called, and the fee was more than Cindy could bear. At that moment, there was no way she could have realized that he hadn't fully arrived yet. For the next month, they lived a surreal life. In front of the kids, they pretended everything was normal and fine. They went to Sarah's soccer games and Michael's karate lessons. They were convincing at the mid-month parent-teacher conferences. Miss Snyder never noticed anything was wrong. After the kids went to bed, things were different behind closed doors. Cindy would look pleadingly at Rick, wanting to talk, and Rick would do his best not to fall apart. Cindy took responsibility, perhaps unlike some wives, but that didn't negate the betrayal and humiliation Rick felt. Every week, Rick told the kids that he had a business trip with an overnight stay, that he would leave late at night and wouldn't be back until dinner the next day. He used that time to walk around, think, and make a plan of how to proceed. He realized that if this continued, he would have to see a psychologist for a long time to come. Rick made partner at his firm because he was great at analytics. He knew how to evaluate the positives and negatives of investments better than most. He had a keen eye for detail, and even the smallest opportunity or risk didn't escape his attention. Now he applied that thinking to his home life. The positives and negatives of staying with Cindy? How will the children be affected in the long and short term by staying together in a lie or divorce, or how will the firm take it if this comes out? Part of why they like me was my commitment to Cindy and family. How will finances be handled in the event of divorce or marriage, or what will Cindy do with her business? Continuing with Bennett's hotels doesn't make sense, but does she know that? Is Cindy just sorry for what happened, or does she want something different and better in her life? Getting caught was painful, but how does she deal with who she's become and what she's done? What are my options? Is there anything other than divorce or staying together? It was the latter question that caught Rick's attention as the best possible path. There was a third option. It was radial. It would be incredibly difficult to implement, but it would probably be the best for everyone, even him. So, on the third evening of the business trip away from home, Rick sat on the patio of the Marriott Courtyard Hotel where he was staying. He began to consider his decision from all angles and all perspectives. The planning had to be precise and the execution even better, but maybe, just maybe. 2 weeks passed, the plan was still in the formative stages, but was shaping up well enough in Rick's opinion that he decided to have a serious talk with Cindy. He knew it might take a couple hours, but it had to happen. He asked Mrs. Bowling to babysit and then intentionally drove with Cindy back to the park, where their first conversation about her cheating had taken place. Back at the same picnic table where the whole disaster was laid bare before them, they continued their conversation. Rick began. Cindy, I know the last few weeks have been horrible for both of us. I appreciate you honoring my request to give me time to think. I want to share some things with you and then give you a chance to respond. I hope you don't mind. Cindy nodded her head affirmatively, and he continued. I don't want to repeat everything that happened, especially the night I ran into you and your boyfriend, Bennett. I've already told you that I'm crushed to the core. I'm not a perfect man or husband, but I've always been 100% committed to us and our children. I have never cheated on you even when I flirted with other women. The thought that someone could replace you in my heart is unthinkable. I was blown away from the first day I met you, and I thought you felt the same way. We are together, not needing anyone else. I just always assumed we would grow old together. I was wrong about the depth of your commitment to us, and that we had a chance to remain husband and wife. Cindy looked at Rick with longing in her eyes. Rick, she pleaded, I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I hope that we can somehow resolve the resentment and betrayal I've brought to our relationship. I don't want to give up on us. I want to work with all my strength and every fiber of my being to see if we can stay together." Rick looked away for a moment before answering. "I know you mean what you say, Cindy, and I've been thinking about this option for us for a long time. On the one hand, I think we have enough acceptance and forgiveness to stay together." At those words, Cindy felt hopeful. "But," Rick continued, "I've decided it's not right for me for two reasons. First, while I'm sure we could be forgiven, I don't see any way to regain your trust. Truth be told, if you told me the sky was blue and the grass was green, I wouldn't believe you. Never again will you walk out our door to work without me suspecting you're going to meet your lover or new mistress. Never again will I be able to live with you without doubting your fidelity. Second, I will never be able to touch you as a husband touches his wife without seeing the face of the man you deliberately chose over me, over and over again. You wanted him, not me. You gave yourself to him without a thought for my love or our relationship. There's no way in the world I can look at you again and not see the reflection of Bennett Davis looking back at me." Cindy's shoulders slumped. She knew he was right and wanted to let him know she would be faithful for the rest of their lives, but she also knew she had no right to demand his trust. "I want to fight for us, Rick. Don't you think we're worth fighting for?" At that moment, Cindy saw what could be called rage in his eyes for the first time. As he stared at her, she physically recoiled from him. He seemed to have some mastery over his emotions, but there was a harsh note in his words. "Fight for us. Are you going to fight for us? You want me to fight for us? What do you think I did every day when we were married? Work hard and move up the career ladder. That was fighting for us. Spending time with our wonderful children was a struggle for us. Trying to remember all the things you love and enjoy and making sure I provide them regularly has been a struggle for us. From the little things to the big things, I've always intentionally fought for you to know that I am crazy about wanting us to be together forever. How have you fought for us, Cindy? You've done it repeatedly with Bennett Davis. I'm sorry, but I don't understand how I stopped fighting for us, Cindy. You stopped 8 months ago and now you resent me for not wanting to accept what you did and move on as if nothing happened?" Rick took a deep breath and continued, watching the tears roll from both of their eyes. "I want to ask you so many questions, Cindy, but there's no point in asking someone who's been lying to you for a long time. How can I trust your word? You may be sorry, but maybe you're just saying that so you can get back to having fun with Bennett behind my back. I want to ask if you learned anything from that, but whatever you say, I'm guessing the most important lesson for you is how not to get caught next time. I so want to go back to the conversations we used to have when we shared our hearts with each other, but that couple no longer exists. You killed us with your cheating, lies, and betrayal. There is no going back. There is only moving forward with the best solution for all of us. I realized the other day that our night at the Ritz took place after you were with Bennett. You partied with him over the weekend and then came home and let me wine and dine the whore I thought was my faithful wife. God, how you must have laughed at me. Your little cuckold, not realizing what a fool he was so happy to hear how proud his wife was of him. What a complete idiot I was. But no more. Cindy couldn't object to anything, only deeply regretted how terribly she had hurt the man she had professed to love with all her heart, all the days of her life. He was right. He had fought for them every day. She was the one who had spit on his love with her infidelity. She had been heartless to the husband she had adored only a year before. But her infatuation, lust, and selfishness had set all of that aside. "Are you going to divorce me, Rick?" she finally asked when she could formulate the words. "No, Cindy, I'm not going to divorce you, and I'm not going to stay married to you. I'm creating a solution that I think will work for everyone. It will not come without pain and loss, but I believe it is the only acceptable solution. I promise I will explain everything to you in a few weeks. I'm not going to tell you what to do, Cindy, but I am going to explain to you in detail my steps, my path. I'm not going to ask for your opinion on my choices because, quite frankly, I don't trust you to have my best interests or the best interests of our children at heart. Once you understand my decisions, you can make your own. I won't try to control you." "But how will I know if you don't share that with me now?" asked Cindy, genuinely confused by the direction the conversation had taken. She wanted so badly to reach out and put her arm around him and hug him to hold her, but it looked like that was never going to happen again. Rick looked her straight in the eye with a dead calm, almost painful sense of acceptance of fate and replied, "You'll find out." They talked for a few more minutes, Cindy gently prodding Rick for vague explanations, but he didn't budge. He was sure she would understand when the time came. A few months ago, my friend and coworker Lori warned me that if we danced to his tune, the piper would eventually show up and demand payment. I guess she was right. Rick was surprised to hear that Lori knew what was going on and had tried to warn Cindy and Bennett. It only hurt him more. So before you were having fun with Bennett, you were warned and you didn't stop? You didn't come to me to tell me about your struggle? You just carried on? Tears were already flowing freely from his eyes. Her husband was sobbing. Cindy burst into tears again and dropped her head in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Rick stirred, and she thought that maybe he would come to hold her. Please, God, let him come and hold me, she begged in her heart. Instead, he stood up and moved toward her, folding his arms across his chest. When she raised her head, he said, The trumpeter has come and is demanding at least partial payment. Maybe someday it will be time for full payment. 2 weeks and 4 days later, Rick left for his weekly business trip, where he had time alone to sort himself out and work through his pain. He hugged and kissed his children goodbye, and it seemed to Cindy that he was a little sadder than he had been the last few days. It must be hard for him to say goodbye even for 24 hours, she thought. Cindy was sleeping better at night because she was taking melatonin, which helped her fight sleep at night. Rick suggested that she leave the children overnight with Mrs. Bowling and her cat. She had become almost an aunt to the children. Rick suggested that she could get a good night's sleep after a couple glasses of wine. Cindy agreed, and Mrs. Bowling happily welcomed her young friends. It was 5:30 a.m. and her cell phone had been ringing nonstop for 3 minutes before she heard it, flipped it open, and picked it up. The screen flashed with the word 911 on it. Hello? Cindy said, trying to force herself to wake up. Is this Cindy Thomas, Richard Thomas's wife? Said a professional voice on the other end of the line. Cindy sat up sharply in bed. No one called him Richard. Yes, that's her. Is everything all right? Excuse me, Mrs. Thomas, but let me clarify that you live at 918 South El Camino Court. Is that correct? Yes, she almost shouted into the receiver. And can you tell me what kind of car your husband drives? A dark gray 2019 Lexus ES. Why? Is something wrong? Mrs. Thomas, I regret to inform you that your husband was involved in an accident on California Highway 79 west of the Pacific Crest Trailhead near Warner Springs. Oh, no, my goodness, Cindy exclaimed. Is he all right? Is he in the hospital or in an ambulance? I'm very sorry to inform you, Mrs. Thomas, but the accident turned out to be fatal. I don't know any other details, but his body is being transported to the University of California Medical Center in San Diego and should arrive there within the hour. I'm sorry for your loss. Cindy was stunned, and for a while couldn't move or even comprehend what she had just heard. Then her head exploded with the news, and her screams would have been heard all around the block by anyone who was awake at that hour. She cried and screamed into her pillow for the better part of an hour before she was exhausted. Finally, she began to come to her senses. She had to tell the kids, but when and how? She had to call her mom and Rick's parents in Denver. She needed a friend, but she didn't know where to turn. She needed to get to UCSDMC right away, but could she bring herself to drive? Kelly was in Europe on business, so she wouldn't be able to help for a few days, if at all. She splashed water on her face, dressed quickly, gathered her hair into a ponytail, and headed for the front door when the doorbell rang. How strange, she thought, so early. It was Brad Stanton, the family lawyer and one of Rick's best friends. He looked like someone had beaten him with a baseball bat. Cindy, I heard the news about the accident. It was just shown on the morning news. I'm so sorry. With those words, she sprawled in his arms, sobbing and shaking violently. Brad held her in the doorway for a moment. Not a moment later, Mrs. Bowling came out of the house in her bathrobe, running across the lawn with a look of concern on her face. Cindy was in no condition to speak, so Brad filled the void. Mrs. Bowling cried, but immediately clung to the young woman and enclosed her in her caring embrace. After a few minutes, Cindy began to slowly come to her senses and insisted on going to the hospital in San Diego. I have to see him. I have to see my Rick. Brad and Mrs. Bowling agreed that she would watch the kids, quickly tell them where Mom was, and drive them to school. They would find out soon enough, but not now. Brad insisted on driving Cindy, and within 5 minutes they were on the road. Cindy's phone began to burst with calls and messages from friends. She called her mom, who said she would be on the first flight out. Cindy then had to break the news to Connor and Lily Thomas, Rick's parents. It was devastating. They, too, promised to be on the first flight they could get on. They figured they'd be there by the time the kids got home from school. Cindy turned off the phone, looked out at the Pacific Ocean, and started crying again. The next 5 days were a living hell. Explaining to the kids that, thank goodness, Grandpa and Grandma and Mrs. Bowling had come to the rescue. Talking to authorities, insurance companies, Cindy had 3 separate life insurance policies, arranging funerals, dealing with clients who were booked for weddings or family gatherings. The list seemed endless. In addition, Cindy was plagued with questions. What was Rick doing an hour out of town on a deserted road in the early morning hours? Although no one used the word reckless, he was definitely speeding. The toxicology report showed that Rick had nothing but blood in his system. No alcohol, drugs, or any other substance that could have interfered with his driving. The contents of his stomach showed that he had eaten steak and salad and potatoes the night before, but had drunk nothing but water. Cindy was stunned. Bennett, for his part, picked up his phone several times to text Cindy, but finally decided not to. He was sure that she was suffering far more than he could imagine and realized that his message would only make matters worse. Lori was in a meeting with a new client when she got the news. Her administrative assistant, Stacy, saw the hurt and pain on her face, but she thought it was a little odd that she didn't look completely shaken. Lori did not attend the funeral. The funeral was held Friday morning, and everyone who knew Rick attended. Cindy was shocked when she heard people talking about him. She knew he was an amazing man, but as one story after another was told, it became clear that her husband was one of the most loyal friends, caring coworkers, generous bosses, and respectful people many of them knew. This made her even more desperate, as she couldn't help but think that if she had been more intimate with her husband, her affair with Bennett would never have happened, and Rick would still be alive to this day. It was up to her to find out just how right she was. Late Sunday afternoon, Brad showed up at the house. He spoke briefly with Cindy's mom and mother-in-law, who immediately grabbed the kids and headed out the door. When Cindy came down the stairs, she saw Brad sitting at the kitchen table with the look of a cat that had just swallowed a canary. Cindy was puzzled by his appearance and behavior. She offered him something to drink. He thanked her but declined, inviting her to sit with him. He began. Cindy, before I convey to you what I've been instructed to convey, I have 2 things to tell you. I'm your friend, but I'm not here today as your friend, but as a representative of a client. That client is Rick. Cindy covered her mouth with her hand and gasped. I say my client is Rick because although he is dead, I still act as his attorney and handle his affairs, both legal and financial. The second thing you should know without a shadow of a doubt is that I had no idea what was going to happen to Rick. Cindy thought this was strange. How could anyone know what would happen as a result of an accident, or even that an accident would happen? Rick understood her confusion. Rick told me verbally and in writing that if anything happened to him, I was to honor his wishes. He paid me in full for the work, even though I offered to do it as a friend. He insisted that everything be done legally and properly. I do not know the contents of this note, but I do know that it is a letter from Rick to you. I have been instructed to deliver it to you and leave immediately before you open and read it. Cindy took the letter from Brad, her hands shaking violently. What else did he instruct you to do? She asked. Brad looked a little embarrassed, but replied, I'm sorry, Cindy, but this is confidential information between me and my client. Rick has strictly forbidden me to give you any information about our conversations, my duties, and his wishes. Again, I apologize. With those words, Brad got up and left without waiting for Cindy's response. Cindy opened the letter, and Piper reappeared to collect some of his debt. Cindy, you already know I'm dead and the funeral is over. Brad handed you this note and left. The kids are with my parents and your mom. They know not to come home for a few hours as you will have a hard time processing this. This is the 3rd option, Cindy. It's the best way I could find. I loved you with all my heart, and now that's gone. You've taken it away. I think it's the best thing I can do. 1. You will know that 2 weeks ago I bought 3 acres of land by the lake at Eagle's Nest. It was for this reason that I was driving on Highway 79 where the accident occurred. The thing is, I bought the property because I had been promoted and we were both making good money. It was supposed to be a surprise for you and the kids, a place where we could build and grow during the summer and long weekends. First, of course, it's a scam. Buying real estate is a cover, but whatever you do, you have to stick to it. Insurance companies won't pay a claim if they find anything suspicious about my death. I visited the new cottage to do some errands and decided to get up early and go home. I was in a hurry because I had a meeting with a client at 9:30. So I was driving fast and lost control of the car. The insurance companies might do a little digging, but they won't find anything. Brad will take care of it if you stick to the story. 3. As far as insurance goes, I changed my will in the last few weeks. 90% of my money, about $3 billion, will go into a trust fund for the kids. They will be able to get whatever they need to pay for college and grad school if they want. The rest will go to them when they reach age 30 and will be split equally 50-50ths. Again, Brad will take care of those details when the time comes. I'm leaving you 10%, or about $300,000 to hold you over until you start working again in a month or so. I wouldn't leave you anything if my conscience allowed it, but I realize you have to take care of the kids while you pretend to grieve for me, so there's enough for that. First, as for our beautiful children, a while back I told you about a psychologist's advice that death is easier on children than divorce. I did some deep research and found several studies that indicate that this is true. That's why I couldn't divorce you, Cindy. I couldn't do that to my children. I think someday they will find out the truth about everything, and then they might hate me. I hope they don't. And if they do, I hope they have someone to explain to them how unfair life can be sometimes. I am grateful that now and for the foreseeable future they can grieve their loss and not have to bear the burden of rejection that comes with divorce. Second, I can't tell you what else to do with your life. I suppose you can go back to Bennett, but there may be someone else you are interested in. Whatever you do, please think of the children first and do what is best for them. They will be leaving home in 9, 10 years, so maybe you can keep your lovers away until then. Third, finally, I have one small request. When you are done with this note, burn it until there are no ashes left. If the insurance companies find it, it will ruin our children's financial future. Reread it a couple more times, but please, if I mean anything to you, burn this note. Don't worry, maybe you'll hear from me again someday. Rick. Cindy cried like she had never cried before. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing and wailing, screaming Rick's name. She was crushed by the aftermath of her affair and feared it was more than she could bear. After an hour or so, she finally found the strength to sit up and reread the note 2 more times. Then she walked over to the fireplace and burned it until only a small pile of ashes remained. Piper had indeed come on a call. Or so she thought. Epilogue. It's been 12 years since that fateful day when Rick Thomas died on California Highway 79. In truth, he died the moment he saw his wife in the arms of another man who had betrayed him, betrayed them, their children, and their future. The rest was just details of how and when. Cindy never married and always kept the secret about Rick's death. She did as he wanted and used the $300,000 to take care of their family while they grieved. It was over a year before she went back to work. She tried to put on a manly appearance, but her business consisted mostly of weddings and family reunions, and it was beyond her. She went to work for a business event planning company and made great strides in her career. In terms of relationships, she dated occasionally, but never met anyone who compared to Rick. She also thought of herself as damaged goods, although counseling helped her cope, so she wondered if she met someone and got married. Would she cheat again? Michael and Sarah begged her to go on dates and try to meet someone. Dad would want you to be happy, they insisted. Yes, he always wanted me to be happy, she thought, and I used that as part of my excuse to destroy him. The pain was returning. As for Bennett, about 4 months after Rick's death, he felt enough time had passed to send Cindy a note. According to Lori's observations, they were no longer lovers, but Bennett was faithful and always tried to be a supportive friend. One morning, he decided to send her a message. It read, "I'm so sorry. B." A moment later, he received a reply from her. "Me too. Goodbye." They never spoke again. Michael and Sarah had graduated from high school, were now in their early 20s, and were attending college. Michael, like his mother, loved people, loved the energy that groups of people enjoying themselves could create, so he attended the University of Southern California, studying hospitality and marketing. Sarah, like her father, loved analytics. Making things work, finding solutions, was what got her out of bed in the morning. She ended up going to Stanford, where she studied economics. Although they were only 8 years old when their father died, both were deeply affected by his loss. The thought of Daddy not coming home kept them going for a long time, but their mom and grandparents worked hard to help them get through the pain and start enjoying life. Each of them, in their own way, decided that their life motivation would be their desire to honor their father's memory. On a warm spring morning, Cindy sat at her desk in her apartment. She was sipping a cup of hot black coffee while reviewing a new contract for an executive retreat when the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she was greeted by Brad Stanton. "Brad, it's been months," Cindy said with a smile as she reached out for a hug. "I'm so happy to see you." Brad responded to the friendly hug, but was a little stiff. "Thank you, Cindy. May I come in and talk to you?" Cindy noted that something official sounded in his voice. This wasn't just stopping by and chatting with a friend. "Sure, Brad. Can I offer you a cup of coffee?" "No thanks, I can only stay a couple minutes." They sat down at the kitchen table and Brad began, "Cindy, as you know, today would have been Rick's 45th birthday." Cindy flinched. She had completely forgotten that today was the 7th of April, Rick's birthday. She made a mental note to call the kids as soon as Brad left. "As you know, before Rick died, he changed his will and left instructions on what he wanted done in the event of his death. Cindy, I'll be honest with you and tell you that I knew something was wrong. He wasn't himself, but he didn't want to tell me what was wrong. As his friend, I pressured him. As his lawyer, I had to follow his instructions. He never allowed me to understand or find out what was going on until today." Cindy's eyes widened with surprise and confusion at the same time. "What do you mean, Brad?" "Cindy, before Rick died, he wrote me a long note that he never gave me back. This morning at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, there was a loud knock on my door. When I answered it, it was a courier with an envelope addressed to me. I didn't recognize the return address. It was some P.O. Box in Austin, Texas. I was a little angry at being disturbed early in the morning, but curiosity took over. I went back to my office and opened it. Inside was a letter from Rick. It was typed and had 12 single-spaced pages. Attached to the letter with a paperclip was a short note handwritten by someone named Lori." Cindy began to shake with resentment, pain, and memories. Brad continued, "The note simply said, 'Please read carefully and follow the instructions.'" Lie. I started reading Rick's note. The first line was so quintessential Rick. "Hey buddy, get your ass out of bed. I need you to help me finish some unfinished business." Yes, I know it's 6 a.m. I told them it was exactly 6 and paid a little extra to make sure they were reliable. I won't detail the rest of the note, Cindy, but I will say that Rick told me everything. The whole 9 yards in detail. He paused briefly to let her realize what he'd said and saw tears begin to form in her eyes. "I can't imagine how you could do that to a great guy like Rick, a guy who gave you all his love and devotion. A guy who eventually gave you his life." Brad stood up and finished his business. Handing Cindy a white envelope with her name on it, he said, "Cindy, I never want to talk to you again. I will keep in touch with Michael and Sarah because they are my best friend's children. If I see you at a social function, I'll be polite, for his and their sake, not yours. But don't ever try to contact me in any way. Do you understand me?" Cindy could barely get a word out, but looked at Brad and replied, "Yes, I understand." With those words, he turned and walked away, but at that moment she heard him mutter, "Selfish goddamn whore." The envelope lay on the table as if daring her to open it. She recognized the handwriting. It was Rick's. It took a few minutes before she worked up the courage to open it, but she finally did. "Cindy, it's been 12 years since the events that brought us to this morning. In my last letter to you, I mentioned that maybe someday you would hear from me again. Maybe someday the children will know what happened to us and to them. Well, today that day has come. First, when I found out that Lori tried to talk you out of having fun with Bennett and you ignored her advice, I decided to turn to her for help. She's the only person on the planet who knew of my intentions. She begged and pleaded with me not to do it. She even said that I could take the kids and come to Austin to visit her. Imagine that. A woman of real character. I wish I had met her before I laid eyes on you. Anyway, when I declined, she agreed to go along with my wishes. Second, my first request was that she keep this note until today, my 45th birthday. On that day, she was to give Brad this note along with a note for him promptly at 6 a.m. The note was to have Brad read my letter and then give it to you. I had a backup plan to get this note to you no matter what, but I hope Brad and Lori are in good health and were able to help me finish the job. Third, this morning, both Michael and Sarah will receive a similar note from me outlining everything that happened 12 years ago. I haven't left anything out. Since they are adults, I believe they have the right to know the truth. The whole truth. The statute of limitations on insurance fraud in California is 4 years, so their inheritance is safe. As I mentioned in my previous letter, they may hate me for this, but I'm sure Brad and Lori will help them make sense of what happened. Good luck trying to get rid of the lies you have told your children over the past 12 years. I'm sure if they want to talk to you, they will have more than a few questions. Fourth, if your mom and my parents are still alive, they will receive a similar note as partners in my firm. Fifth, as for Bennett, today's Santa Barbara News Press will publish a full-page memo about his machinations with you. It details how the two of you planned and created amazing wedding events while you cheated on me and he entertained a married woman. The article ends by urging people to seek help elsewhere. I may not be able to destroy him, but I hope it will make his life miserable for a while. Maybe you two can get together, if you haven't already, and have some good fun to ease the pain. By the way, you are named specifically in the article, so some friends and coworkers may have questions for you as well. Sixth, Cindy, almost 13 years ago, I thought we were as happy and content with each other as any couple could be. It all turned out to be a lie, a tragic lie. So, Cindy, you've picked the tune, you've enjoyed the dance, and now it's time to pay the bill in full. Rick. Moments after Cindy read Rick's note, her phone began to ring off the hook. Note, 6 months later, all 3 BD properties were sold at a big loss to the owner to an Austin-based investment group. The Templeton Group. Davis Bennett, at age 53, was financially ruined. From Edgar Allan Poe's novel, The Cask of Amontillado. In the end, I shall be avenged. It was a certain settled matter, but the very certainty with which it was settled precluded the thought of risk. I must not merely punish, but punish with impunity. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.